So this dichotomy is it's a very fascinating one. It's a very fascinating one. Machiro used to say, oye, si tú quieres encontrar música cubana, tocada a lo máximo, búscate un puertorriqueño de Nueva York. Hey man, if you want to hear, Machiro used to say, if you want to hear Cuban music played to the maximum, find a Puerto Rican from New York. I mean, he used to say that all the time. I mean, it's a testimony to our greatness as Puerto Rican musicians. I think what's happening now, which is great, which is fantastic, is that finally we're coming to grips that we have to, in Puerto Rico, bring out our culture. You know, we still are the last colony left in the Caribbean. And we've suffered from that colonial mentality for many, 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 many years. Hence, we play everybody else's music fantastic, but we've tended to forget about our own forms of music. So now there's this big explosion, especially here in New York City, of Bomba and Plena groups that's fantastic. There's over 30 groups in the tri-state area performing, and new groups being formed by the children of the members of those groups, etc. You know, it's like being passed down generation to generation. You have Tato Torres and Yerba Buena, who they come out dressed like hip hoppers because they're young people, and all of a sudden they're playing hardcore Bomba and Plena. And then you have groups like Juan Gutierrez and Los Pleneros de la 21, who's Juan has got to be credited because he's an iconic figure here in New York City, because when nobody was doing Bomba and Plena, nobody, absolutely no one, he took it upon himself to preserve these traditions and illuminate people in New York City, and he's traveled all over the world, hipping people to the greatness of Puerto Rican folk forms. And then we have forward-thinking people like Ricardo Pons, who in my opinion is probably the greatest all-around musician that Puerto Rico has produced in the last 100 years. He's a babalao, he's a Santeria priest of Obatala. He's an incredible virtuosic saxophone player, like on all the saxophones, particularly alto and baritone and soprano, and incredible flute player, incredible composer and arranger. He's on my two big band albums that have been nominated for Grammys. And he formed a group along with several other people years ago known as Viento de Agua, where they took Bomba and Plena and brought it into the 21st century. It's like the equivalent of Irakere in Cuba, doing Afro-Cuban rhythms and bringing them out with all this folklore, etc., but modernizing it to the maximum. Same thing, but with Puerto Rican rhythms, Afro-Puerto Rican rhythms. So all of this movement has been happening over the last few years, and you have Gary Nunez and Truco y Sabaroco, and et cetera, and more groups, et cetera, incorporating authentic Puerto Rican rhythms into the mix. So we have a bright future in terms of finally our identity as Puerto Ricans being brought to the forefront with our music. Because one of the interesting things about the Puerto Rican identity, especially in New York City, is that we found in salsa a way to a music that we could identify with, but it isn't our music. It's Cuban rooted music. So now, after all these years, because of all these things that have been happening, the great rhythmic traditions of Puerto Rico are coming out. I'll give you for instance. About 2 years ago, about a year ago or so, I was at the celebrity basketball game in Orchard Beach in the Bronx, which is our beach. That's the beach that's always been la playa de los Boricua. It has some other nicknames, but I won't get into that. But you would always see people, playing guaguancó, which is a Cuban rhythm from the streets of Havana and Matanzas. And people singing and dancing and stuff. At that basketball game, after the game, I saw a couple of guys playing rumba. They're playing, and all of a sudden, some of the guys from Yerba Buena were playing in that celebrity basketball game. What did they do? They brought out the barrels, los barriles de bomba. And all of a sudden, man, you hear those deep, deep, huge drums playing el ritmo de Zika. I mean, it drowned out the rumberos that were playing on the side. And then those guys stopped playing and they came over to check out the bomba that was happening, and bombazo that was happening. I had never seen that ever before at Orchard Beach. So I says, wow, all right, yeah, man. I said, Puerto Rico in the house.